Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa, Parudika Acharya, Ashtotar Tata Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Jai, ISKCON, Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Parudika Acharya, Ashtotar Tata Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay, so just before we begin, we've been going back and forth about the regimen for chanting each individual Sanskrit word and how that's going to be arranged, So I think I would come to a good conclusion. Let's see if we can hold it. So when we have a regular size verse like this, 32 syllables, we'll go through the whole thing word by word and then just chant regularly. When we have a longer verse, and I think it makes sense too, we'll go line by line, because the whole idea is that you'll get the pronunciation correctly and then apply it when we chant. But when we have longer verses, it's hard to remember that from the beginning. Sometimes they're really long. So in that way, we'll have a standard, because I did a little research on it. So, all right, no big deal. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 16th day of February 2021 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 7, titled Knowledge of the Absolute, text number 29, page 341. Okay. Jara, Marana, Mokshaya, Mam, Ashritya, Yatanti Ye, Te Brahma, Tadvidu, Kritsnam, Adhyatmam, Karmachakilam, Jala Marana Mokshaya, Mam Ashritya Yatanti Ye, Te Brahma Tadvidu Kritsnam, Adhyatmam karma chakilam Jadamana mokshaya Mama shritti yatanti he Te brahma tadvidhu kritsnam Adhyatmam karma chakilam Jadamana mokshaya Mama shritti yatanti he Te brahma tadvidhu kritsnam Adhyatmam karma chakilam Jadamana mokshaya Mama shritya yatanti he Te brahma tadvidhu kritsnam Adhyatmam karma chakilam Jadamana mokshaya Mama shritya yatanti he Te brahma tadvidhu kritsnam Adhyatmam karma chakilam Jadamana mokshaya Mama shritya yatanti he Te brahma tadvidhu kritsnam Adhyatmam karma chakilam. You ready, Ravi? Go ahead. Jara? Jara manana mokshaya Adhyatmam karma chakilam. Jara from old age, marana and death, mokshaya for the purpose of liberation, mam, me, ashritya, taking shelter of, yatanti, endeavor, yea, all those who, te, such persons, brahma, brahman, tat, actually that, viduhu, they know, kritsnam, everything, adhyatmam, transcendental, karma, activities, cha, also, akilam, entirely. Translation. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. Purport. Birth, death, old age, and diseases affect this material body, but not the spiritual body. There is no birth, death, old age, and disease for the spiritual body, so one who attains a spiritual body becomes one of the associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages in eternal devotional service, is really liberated. Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. It is said that one should understand that he is Brahman, spirit soul. This Brahman conception of life is also in devotional service, as described in this verse. The pure devotees are transcendentally situated on the Brahman platform, and they know everything about transcendental activities. 4 kinds of impure devotees who engage themselves in transcendental service of the Lord achieve their respective goals. And by the grace of the Supreme Lord, when they are fully Krishna conscious, they actually enjoy spiritual association with the Supreme Lord. But those who are worshippers of demigods never reach the Supreme Lord in his supreme planet. Even the less intelligent Brahman-realized persons cannot reach the supreme planet of Krishna, known as Goloka Vrindavan. Only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness, mam ashritya, are actually entitled to be called Brahman, because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. Such persons have no misgivings about Krishna, and thus they are factually Brahman. Those who are engaged in worshipping the form or archa of the Lord on the altar, or who are engaged in meditation on the Lord simply for liberation from material bondage, also know by the grace of the Lord the purports of Brahman, Adibhuta, etc., as explained by the Lord in the next chapter. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So I do recall reading this last night. You may recall, I don't know if you do, but we can explore a little bit anyway. So, in the first line, Krishna says, Jara marana moksha mama shritti yatantiye. That those who are really serious about escaping from old age and death, and with it birth and diseases, take shelter of me. But it doesn't just say they take shelter of me and that's it. Yatantiye, they also strive. In other words, we may take shelter of Krishna in a formal way, but to really be under his full shelter and refuge requires practice of sadhana bhakti. Sadhana means practice and work. So, and even in that striving state, they know Brahma. They know Brahman completely. When they're fully purified and Krishna reveals himself fully, then they know everything about the spirit. They know themselves as pure spirit souls. They know the absolute truth as a supreme spiritual person, and they become gradually acquainted with the spiritual world. Even in this body, one can have those kind of revelations if one is pure enough. Now Krishna is starting to list things, adhyatmam and karma. And Arjuna will ask the questions: what is karma? What is this adhyatmika? You'll see in the next chapter begins with these questions. It wants Krishna to explain more how these things fit into the process of yoga, bhakti yoga, and especially Priyanakali, at the end time, the time of death. How can one know you and go back to Godhead? So Prabhupada makes a distinction between those who are endeavoring transcendentalists, but they're not devotees. They're kind of yogis, impersonalists. They cannot be fully acquainted. They cannot get a realization or a revelation of the personality of Godhead. Krishna says, Bhakti mama vijanati yavanyastasmi tattvataha. The only ones who can know me in truth, that word tattvata is very important, are those who are my devotees, and my pure devotees. He reveals himself proportionally. Remember we had back in the 4th chapter, that I respond exactly according to how one surrenders unto me. And then he says, that everyone is following my path. How is everyone following his path? Even the total karmis, the atheists, the agnostics. How is that? Because since everything is Krishna's energy, his manifestation, those who are serving matter completely, have no idea of spirit, don't believe in God or anything, they're still serving Krishna indirectly, and they will get a reciprocation indirectly. The material energy responds to them, but it also eventually knocks them on the head, and all of their aspirations are destroyed, because that's not the field in which we can understand true bliss and eternal life. So but Krishna is still responding proportionally to their surrender. So we want to approach Krishna as he directs us to approach him, so that he'll reveal himself in the fullest amount that we can understand. Okay. Now Prabhupada makes a very strong distinction between the fact that once we attain a spiritual body, and don't forget, that's part of the definition of mukti according to Bhagavatam. Muktir hitpanyata rupam swarupena vivastiti. The word rupa means form. So mukti, real mukti, and here he's talking about getting free from death and old age. So he's talking about mukti. But real mukti hitpa anyata rupa, means giving up all of these other forms that we've had. Even in this one lifetime, we've had so many forms, and we'll have others. We're actually passing through. What to speak of all the bodies we'd had before, human and subhuman, superhuman, so many different forms, but they're all material, one way or another. So giving up all those forms and being situated in our swarup, which is our real spiritual form, which we still have, but it's buried. We can't access it now. It's being reflected in a distorted, perverted way through the material body. So once we give up all of those material forms and we're situated in our spiritual form through the process of bhakti, where we get progressive more revelation of how we act. Even in this body, we can act according to our spiritual form. And then eventually the material form will fall, and we'll be situated in our spiritual form and be with Krishna. So, all is birth, old age, disease, and death, everything affects the material but not the spiritual body. So we want to try to attain that spiritual body. Then he recalls previously in this chapter, Chaturvadhava Jantamam Jana Sukatan Arjuna. You remember the 4 kind of pious people who approach Krishna, but they're not completely purified. They're after there's a relief of some pain, arto, jigyasur. They're somewhat curious, or they want some money or something else material. And then there's the jnani, who Krishna praises highly. But even the jnani can get stuck up on just wanting liberation and not wanting Krishna. So the 4 kinds of impure devotees who engage themselves in transcendental service of the Lord achieve their respective goals, and by the grace of the Lord, when they're fully Krishna conscious, they actually enjoy spiritual association. So somehow or other, this is a theme that you'll find in Lord Chaitanya's movement. Somehow or other, if someone could come in touch with Krishna, Prabhupada would quote this verse, line, Yena kena upa yena mana Krishna neveshayet, which is kind of based on a verse from the 7th canto. Somehow or other, if someone can become absorbed in Krishna, then the purification will take place. You see? The example is even Kamsa and the demons who get killed by Krishna, they're very fortunate. They're meditating on Krishna. Now, it's mentioned in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, if they don't know that this form that's killing them is God, then they don't get liberation at that time. But they still get purified and move toward liberation. But those who actually realize that, then they may get but merge into the body. That's not what we want to do. But still, it's a long way from being an out-and-out demon and suffering, So somehow or other, we want to relate to Krishna positively in every respect, and develop our innate loving relation with Krishna. So that's bhakti. But so therefore, this Chaturvadhava Jantamam, somehow or other, someone goes to the temple, offers something in the box, prays for a successful day, or that his child will pass the test, or something like that. But still, they're praying to Krishna. They're meditating on Krishna. I just heard Prabhupada in a lecture, he's given an example, a story. I don't know if it's apocryphal or true, but it's got a good lesson. So he describes how there was, as there are throughout India, discourse on the Bhagavatam. And the speaker was speaking about how beautiful Krishna is as a little child in the forest, and he's so decorated with all these jewels and ornaments by his mother, he goes out to herd the cows, So in that assembly, people hearing was a thief. And he heard this description of this young boy in Vrindavan who's, got jewels, he's in the forest. He said, let me go and I'll plunder the boy, He wasn't going to do any harm, He had that idea. So he's serious, Prabhupada said, he's serious. He went all the way to Vrindavan, and he goes out in the forest, and his qualification was he really wanted to see Krishna, He had a great desire to see him in order he could plunder him, but the desire was there. So Krishna appears to him, and it's really charming. Prabhupada's, there's this thief, and eventually says, can I have your jewels? And Krishna says, no, my mother would be very upset. My mother wouldn't like it. So he keeps going back and forth. And meanwhile, he's getting purified just seeing Krishna, you can imagine, So he became a devotee. He was completely purified just by that. So somehow or other, that was Prabhupada's mood. What can I do so that the people will come and listen? When he heard that from one of his early devotees in 22nd Avenue, that in America, many people have a Sunday afternoon dinner that they come and the family comes. And says, okay, well, let's start with the Sunday love feast in the little storefront, right? Now, Prabhupada was cooking. You can imagine the quality of that prasadam. He would cook the first couple of feasts till I learned how to cook. And gradually it got around the community. Wow, there's this incredible free food. It was all free, and the storefront was packed every Sunday. So many people would come just for the feast, as even today they come. But they would hear the kirtan, and then those who were a little bit intelligent, they would hear the lecture. The format was pretty straightforward. The kirtan, the lecture, more kirtan, and the feast, So people would, come, and the kirtan was nice, Sometimes they would stand up and go outside for a smoke during the talk, come back for the second kirtan and the feast, somehow. But with all the people coming and going, a certain number was serious, and they were receptive. They got purified to get attracted. So somehow or other. No rules and regulations. There's some rules and regulations, obviously, just to come in. What was that famous thing we had? The crest test? You ever heard the crest test? Maybe you heard of it. For someone to come into the temple, what to speak of stay, they have to pass a minimum quality of these 4 things. Cleanliness, respectfulness. What was the other ones? Sanity and sobriety. Crest, CRSS, crest test. So any one of those that you fall below a certain, you can't come into the temple or stay in the temple. We've had some, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but we've had people who are not so sane, not so sober, like that. So, but it was very free in those early days, because everybody was on something. You knew that the drugs were going to be all pervasive, especially when he went to California, to San Francisco. But they were coming in touch with Krishna. That's the whole idea. Those who are engaged in worshipping the form, the archer form of the Lord, engaged in meditation simply for liberation from material bondage, also know by the grace of the Lord the purports of Brahman, Adibhuta, and explain to the Lord in the next chapter. Okay, so let's go. This is the last verse of the chapter, text number 30. Unless there are some questions here or there?
Yes, Prabhu, there is no question.
No questions? Okay, you let me know. I'll give you a signal. Text number 30, page 342. Sadipudari daivam mam Sadiyagyam chaye viduhu Priyanakale pichamam Te vidur yukta chetasaha. Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. Purport. Persons acting in Krishna consciousness are never deviated from the path of entirely understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the transcendental association of Krishna consciousness, one can understand how the Supreme Lord is the governing principle of the material manifestation, and even of the demigods. Gradually, by such transcendental association, one becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and at the time of death, such a Krishna-conscious person can never forget Krishna. Naturally, he is thus promoted to the planet of the Supreme Lord, Goloka Vrindavan. This 7th chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna-conscious person. The beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna-conscious. Such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with the Supreme Lord. And by His grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity and how the living entity forgets Krishna and becomes entangled in material activities. By gradual development of Krishna consciousness in good association, the living entity can understand that due to forgetfulness of Krishna, he has become conditioned by the laws of material nature. He can also understand that this human form of life is an opportunity to regain Krishna consciousness, and that it should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Many subjects have been discussed in this chapter. The man in distress, the inquisitive man, the man in want of material necessities, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of Paramatma, liberation from birth, death, and diseases, and worship of the Supreme Lord. However, he who is actually elevated in Krishna consciousness does not care for the different processes. He simply directly engages himself in activities of Krishna consciousness and thereby factually attains his constitutional position as an eternal servitor of Lord Krishna. In such a situation, he takes pleasure in hearing and glorifying the Supreme Lord in pure devotional service. He is convinced that by his doing so, all his objectives will be fulfilled. This determined faith is called Dravida Dasa, and it is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service. That is the verdict of all scriptures. This 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is the substance of that conviction. Thus end the Bhagavatam purports to the 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of knowledge of the Absolute. So just to remind us, if you recall, the previous chapter ended after Krishna had described in some detail Ashtanga Yoga, and Arjuna had pled that he can't really do it, it's too difficult. Krishna was encouraging him, but finally he said that, don't worry, the best yogi is one who's always thinking of me and wishing me with love. Yogi nama bisarve sharmagaten antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yo mam same yuktitamo mataha. And that's a natural segue into the 7th chapter, because there's no getting around it. You have to fix your mind on Krishna. The mind is the whole object of yoga, really, whatever serious yoga you're practicing. So the mind, the conditioned mind and the out of control mind under the sway of the modes of nature is our worst enemy. We learned that in the 6th chapter also. We're living with our worst enemy, but we don't know it. You know, the mind is pulling us here and there and keeping us bound to this world. And it's filled with so many unfulfilled desires, called the Hridaya Granta, knots in the heart. So how to come to the point of absorbing the mind in the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if we're not going to sit there and do the pranayama and that process, which we know we're not going to be able to do it, right? So then he starts, Maya Sakta Manaparta. That's 7.1. Now I'm going to explain to you how you can make your mind attached to me. Because if the mind becomes attached to Krishna, then fixing the mind on Krishna is a snap. Of course you're going to think about what you're attached to. But now we have so many further attachments. So the whole point is turning the attachment away from Maya to Krishna. So after a few verses, he begins to describe how we're already thinking of Krishna, but through his energies. And he described the energy, the gross energies, the tanmatras, the gross and subtle material energies. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, progressively more subtle. Those are, Krishna says, these are my energies, separated energies. So just like if we see someone, if I see Suresh's coat, sitting somewhere, and I say, well, I recognize that his coat, he wears that coat all the time, So immediately I'm going to think of Suresh. I may even, if I'm responsible, try to find him and give him his coat back, right? That's bhakti, try to return the energy to the... So this chapter, now, he doesn't just list the energies, but then he gives the various examples of how we experience the energy through our senses. Prasoham, aptakonteya, papasmi, shashashuriro. That taste of water that you experience, that's me. In other words, it's everything about it is Krishna's energy. The water is Krishna's energy. Our tongue is part of Krishna's energy, right? And the experience we're having, the taste, is also part of Krishna's energy. So where is there not Krishna? We are just covered by illusion and forgetting Krishna in our separatist mentality. So and then you go to the light of the sun and the moon, and so many things, the fragrance, he covers all the senses that way. Even sex life, which is not against religious, but that's me, And this is not the first of those, the last of the lists. There's other lists where he says, the 10th chapter is famous for that. So this is a way in which, just with our intelligence, by understanding what Krishna is saying here, we can begin to see him in our daily experiences. Prabhupada famously said, he's sitting in the storefront, 26 2nd Avenue, and there's 2 or 3 blocks. I know the area because I used to live down there. 2 or 3 blocks from the Bowery, where we also lived for a while. And the Bowery at that time, just imagine, here we've got our little coterie of homeless people, right? In LA, they have a lot more homeless people. We have more downtown, but we have our little group. So they're everywhere. All the big cities have. So now imagine, in those days, if someone became homeless, lost his job, and whatever, has no shelter, they'd go to New York City and they'd live on the Bowery. In other words, it's a place of pilgrimage for we call them transients or whatever, So they're all over the place. So Prabhupada was living there. So now he's living a few blocks from there, but still they go all over the place. So one day, but they're human beings, and one guy, he heard Prabhupada speak, or he saw them chanting, and he was, there's someone's of purity and saintly Prabhupada just by his aura, because you can tell. So he wanted to do some service. So the guy wanders in, he got a couple of rolls of toilet paper, and he's a little tipsy. And Prabhupada's in the middle of a lecture, so everything stops, and he walks in, and I don't know if you know the layout. There's a bathroom right off the room that they have the class in, So he walks into the bathroom. He knew the out, and he put it in. Said something about service, or for everybody, and then he walked out. So what to make of it? Everyone's waiting. What's Prabhupada going to say? So he said, just see, Even the transient, whatever they call them, can make progress in devotional service. His heart was in the right place. He did what he could do. He felt he wanted to give something. So the idea is that this chapter, the first of the middle six chapters, are said to be the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada mentions at the end of the 12th chapter, I believe. And so he's starting out where we're at. We're in earth, water, fire, air, ether. You can't get around it. But it's the way you think about it. The whole point is how we are relating to this material energy and how we are connecting it to Krishna. Even just in our mind, understanding, this is Krishna's energy. This is God's energy. Then in a sense, you're seeing him there through the material energy. And the mind is becoming trained. Just like we see all of these, in the summertime, more bugs get in here sometime, And we see them in a whole different way than we would if we weren't Krishna conscious. First of all, it's a very fortunate bug. Out of all the trillions and trillions of bugs, this bug has now come into the temple of the Lord. They're very auspicious, right? But then we don't want to step on them going around Tulsi chanting, So he said, okay, get the bug and throw it out, So the bug, of course, thinks, "Oh my God, now I'm going to die." But no, he won't die, at least not voluntarily, at the hand of a devotee. He's very but previously, it's a bug. Just step on the thing, get it out of here. In other words, the mentality has changed. So this chapter is teaching us how to transform our mind so it becomes our friend. So he goes through that, and then he describes the general principle. He says in text 12, whatever state of being is manifest, either goodness, passion, or ignorance, know that it's coming from me. I am in one sense everything, but I am independent. So these modes of nature, because it's not so easy. In other words, okay, I've just read these verses about how I'm the fragrance of the earth, I'm the light of the sun and the moon. Now I'm ready. I'll think of Krishna when I see those things. But no, you won't, because your mind is ready to get into that mood of trying to enjoy those objects. And as soon as that happens, you forget all about Krishna. You forget about the verses. See, that's the whole thing, is this mohita. These three modes of nature, which are constituents of this nature, everybody's bewildered by them in this world. And they don't understand, they don't know that I'm there, we're above the modes and inexhaustible. And then comes this key section of the chapter, beginning with Daiviyesha Gunamayi, text number 14. This is perhaps the most often quoted verse of the chapter. This divine energy of mine, the first thing is, it's divine. In one sense, everything is spiritual. From Krishna's point of view, everything is spiritual, because it's all his energy and he's spiritual. But there's a certain part of that spiritual energy that can be seen and related to materially by the conditioned souls, because we disconnected from it artificially. We don't see that Krishna is behind it. We want to try to use that energy for ourselves. So therefore, it's divine energy, consisting of the gunas, of the three modes, mamamaya duratyaya. When one is forgetting Krishna behind it, and we're not in the service mood, we're in the enjoying mood, then we cannot cross beyond our own. We're too much helplessly bound, like on ropes, right? The gunas also means rope. But one who surrenders unto me can easily cross beyond it. So the idea is that the only way of getting out of the puzzle or the trap is by surrendering to the one who created the trap. In other words, it's his energy, and this and Maya Devi is ultimately his servant. And when Krishna orders, okay, this one is serving me and surrendering me, then release. And what is the form of that release? More and more vairagya. You see, you come to the point, of where you're not attracted by the allurements, and you're not disturbed so much by the suffering. You're more equipoised, and your mind is fixed on Krishna. That equipoise is so important. So then he describes who does and who doesn't surrender. Remember, this is the most quoted verse. This one, Namam Dushkrita no muda papanyanima. Who doesn't surrender to me? Prabhupada would say, if you don't surrender to Krishna, you're a fool, you're a rascal. Don't blame me. I'm not saying it. Krishna says, Namam Dushkrita no muda. Papanyan. They don't papanyan to me. Then they're the most lowest of mankind. Their knowledge is taken away by illusion. In other words, they may have so many degrees in science, but it's all for Maya, so it doesn't count. And then the out-and-out demons, who are sworn enemies of the Lord, 4 different kinds. But not to despair, there's also 4 kinds of those who defend it. And then he says, Chaturvadhabhajan Demam. And then we're back to that, those pious people who do approach Krishna, albeit for material purposes, but because they're approaching Krishna, they can get purified, just like this thief or anyone else, So, and then he singles out the jnani, those who are truly in knowledge and know why they're approaching Krishna rather than just for some material purpose. And then comes another really important verse, Bahunam Manamante. This is 19. After many, many births of cultivating knowledge, one who's truly in knowledge will surrender unto me, understanding that everything is Vasudeva. It's all his energy. I'm also his. And so therefore I must serve. And these Mahatmas are very rare, Sudurlabha. And then he has this whole lesson. Oh, okay, yeah? Question?
Question, yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
When you mentioned that we should see all this material stuff, things are, we should see in Krishna in all the water and whatever we drink. But sometimes my question is sometimes when we see something, somebody is doing something that they're not supposed to do, or do's and don'ts, and how do we see, how can we see Krishna? And it's really hard. How do we, in our mind, for our mind, how do we see that?
Well, you have to start out with the basic understanding that, as Prabhupada would say, quoting somebody, I think it's the Bible, maybe, not a blade of grass moves without the will of Krishna. So whether one is completely immersed in ignorance, in ordinary people, or one is a devotee trying to practice devotional service, it's all Krishna's energy, and we're all Krishna's. So it's not a question of someone doing something non-Krishna conscious. You just think of it this way: the intelligence that they're using, the senses that they're using to do any activity, that's all coming from Krishna. Now, Prabhupada was asked this question. I was listening to a tape, and he said, "Well, how does evil also? Is God also the cause of evil?" And Prabhupada to me said, "Yes, everything. So it's just like the sunshine, but there's also shadow. So the sunshine is also, without the sunshine there'd be no shadow, just be darkness. So in a sense, the sunshine is also producing the shadow. You know what I'm saying? And in a larger sense, when living entities rebel against Krishna's will, then they're sent to this place, reformatory. That's also a creation of Krishna, just like the prison house is a creation of the government, necessary to separate the rogues and rascals and thieves and murderers from the society at large, so there won't be a disturbance. We became a disturbance in the spiritual world. Now we're trying to reform so we won't be disturbance and admitted back into our real home, go home back to Godhead. So the whole thing is Krishna's, But sometimes we see, the out and out demons and enemies of God, Krishna describes in the 16th chapter. But they're still under his control, but not through the control of loving devotion. We want to place ourselves voluntarily under control of Krishna. We've been under his control forever, but we haven't recognized that, and so we can also become out and out demons, animals, and everything. We have been through that. So we can see if we're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, that everything is Krishna's, but in this world there are many souls who don't recognize that, don't understand that, and so we'll find in this world so many things that are disturbing to our because they're rebellious against Krishna. There's nothing sacred about it, like that. But ultimately, if we're intelligent, we'll see that that's also ultimately Krishna's energy and it's connected to him.
Thank you. So we shouldn't be judgmental to other people and not judging them by whatever they're doing.
Well, no, I mean we should understand the nature of things. If we have a possibility to bring them closer to Krishna, we should. If not, we should just see this is the workings of the material energy, because we want to preserve our own consciousness at all costs. Because otherwise, if we get affected by bad association, then that doesn't help anybody. So we preserve our consciousness, our sadhana, and then we can also help those who are able to be helped. Otherwise, we just see the workings of the material energy, amazingly, but it's still Krishna's.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
Okay. All right. So let's just begin the 8th chapter. It begins with go ahead. You have a question? You're going to have to take the mask off and or use the mic. Go get the mic. Here, use this.
I was distributing books today and I met this nice young man. He's a yoga teacher. And so he got Prabhupada's book, and he said he already read 100 pages through it. So we're talking about the people that don't surrender and the 4 people that do surrender. He said he really likes the book, but one thing that he didn't like was how Prabhupada would criticize other people's views, And I didn't get a chance to really answer that because he had to go with his wife and his sons. So I was wondering, how would you have handled that? Because he was practicing Buddhist.
Well, this is one book sometimes in this book, in the first chapter, in the 16th chapter, there's a couple of passages about ladies. But Prabhupada is giving the view of the Shastra, really, the Mano Samhita he quotes, like that. And the main thing but I mean, I don't understand quite the question. There was something about Prabhupada is criticizing other spiritual groups or something, or?
I guess he's following the Buddhist temple.
Oh yeah. Well, you need to show how the only way to really get to know God in the fullest sense is through bhakti. And there, if you know the Bhagavad Gita, you can immediately point to 55. Bhaktya mama vijanati yamajasasmi tattvataha. That to understand Krishna in truth, and God in truth, one has to practice loving devotion. And in every step we find in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is emphasizing his own personality. He's speaking here, he's talking about bhakti, which is definitely a personal philosophy, that's the only way to know him. And so what's good in Buddhism is that they're recognizing that that there's no happiness in this world in trying to enjoy the senses. But their solution is first of all impossible. You cannot annihilate the soul. We are eternal. That's my understanding, is that they were looking for the void, where you become completely void. There's no void anywhere, and so it's best to try to point out to someone like that the nature of the real spiritual life and the spiritual world, where there's no suffering, there's no modes of nature, there's no birth, there's no death, but there is an endless variety of loving exchanges at the highest levels of spiritual happiness, bliss, ananda, as opposed to lack of variation. So that's the critique, and it's hard when someone gets involved in that. That's why Lord Chaitanya said, Mayavadi Bhashya Sunle Sarva Nash, that if someone reads the impersonalist interpretation of the or explanation of Vedanta Sutra, one is going to be finished, because you'll get convinced to that and become attracted to becoming Brahman, the supreme Brahman, which is impossible. So it's difficult. I mean, it's good that he was interested, and sometimes people who are involved in that, we've got, the movement is filled with people who are into other yoga things and then got attracted to Krishna. So hopefully you can eventually do that. All right, we have time to do at least one verse here, if it's okay. Attaining the Supreme. And this follows exactly from the Arjuna's asking the question related to Krishna's statements at the end of the 7th chapter. Arjuna Vacha Kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam Kim karma purushottama Adibhutang cha kim proktam Adidaivam kim uchyate. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the Self? What are fruit of activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Purport. In this chapter, Lord Krishna answers different questions from Arjuna, beginning with, what is Brahman? The Lord also explains karma, fruit of activities, devotional service, and yoga principles, and devotional service in its pure form. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the Supreme Absolute Truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In addition, the living entity, the individual soul, is also called Brahman. Arjuna also inquires about Atma, which refers to the body, soul, and mind. According to the Vedic dictionary, Atma refers to the mind, soul, body, and senses also. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, Supreme Person, which means that he was putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to the Supreme Person, knowing him to be the Supreme Authority able to give definitive answers. Okay, one more, and that'll finish the questions of Arjuna. Adiyagya katam kotra Dehismin Madhusudana Prayana kale chakatam Geyosi niyatatmabihi. Who is the Lord of sacrifice, and how does he live in the body, O Madhusudan? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Purport. Lord of sacrifice may refer to either Indra or Vishnu. Vishnu is the chief of the primal demigods, including Brahma and Shiva, and Indra is the chief of the administrative demigods. Both Indra and Vishnu are worshipped by yajna performances. But here Arjuna asks who is actually the Lord of yajna sacrifice, and how the Lord is residing within the body of the living entity. Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. Actually, these questions, which are of the nature of doubts, should not have arisen in the mind of Arjuna, because Arjuna is a Krishna-conscious devotee. Therefore, these doubts are like demons. Since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna here addresses him as Madhusudana, so that Krishna might kill the demonic doubts that have arisen in Arjuna's mind. Now the word Priyanakale in this verse is very significant, because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. Arjuna is very, Priyanakale means end time. The end, and each of us has an end time for this body. Arjuna is very anxious to know of those who are constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness, what should be their position at that final moment. At the time of death, all the bodily functions are disrupted, and the mind is not in a proper condition. Thus disturbed by the bodily situation, one may not be able to remember the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Kulashekar, a great devotee, prays, "My dear Lord, just now I am quite healthy, and it is better that I die immediately, so that the swan of my mind can seek entrance at the stem of your lotus feet." The metaphor is used because the swan, a bird of the water, takes pleasure in digging into the lotus flowers. Its sporting proclivity is to enter the lotus flower. Maharaj Kulashekar says to the Lord, "Now my mind is undisturbed, and I am quite healthy. If I die immediately thinking of your lotus feet, then I am sure that my performance of your devotional service will become perfect. But if I have to wait for my natural death, then I don't know what will happen, because at that time the bodily functions will be disrupted, my throat will be choked up, and I do not know whether I shall be able to chant your name. Better let me die immediately." Arjuna questions how a person can fix his mind on Krishna's lotus feet at such a time. So, if you look carefully, you'll see that Arjuna is completely repeating what Krishna said in the previous chapter at the end, and all these are some of them are principles: the Adi Daivam, Adi Bhautam, Adi Atmam, and Adi Yagya. This Adi prefix indicates the general principle of the things, and you may recognize this Adi-atmic, Adi-daivik, and Adi-bhautic miseries. Remember those, the threefold miseries? So how are those miseries, inflicted upon us? That's this principle of Adi-daiva. For instance, the gods, the demigods are inflicting. By the way, we should be giving our thanks for the fact that we can sit here peacefully and hear the class. A huge swath of this country is under tremendous storms and cold and no electricity, and it's horrible. I mean, it seems like this is the time of reaping the sinful reactions for this. I mean, it's one thing after another. You got this COVID going on, now you have these extreme weather situations. Well, I don't know what's going to come down here, but so far it's happened before, where you hear about all these fires and things and nothing, but here we are sitting peacefully in SanDiego. So we should be give a thanks to the Lord that we're able to peacefully have a Bhagavad Gita class. So these questions will be systematically answered. One that I always remember: Bhuta Bhavo Bhavakado Visaga Karma Sangita. Now, what is karma? Karma is some activity that's in producing another body for you. In other words, fruit of activity of any kind is accumulating, and that's going to determine your next body. So the way to avoid a next material body is to take all your karma, your activities, and turn them into acts of devotion to Krishna. Then there's no reaction. Karmani nirtahati kintu to bhakti bhajam. This is from the Brahma Samhita. That for the devotees of Govinda Mani Purusham, he personally burns to ashes all of the seeds of the previous karma. So that's a very nice metaphor describing it. Okay, any final comment or question? Locally? Remotely? Yes, Prabhu. Hold on. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna.
I just take off the mask so I can hear you.
So I was, when you were reciting the earlier verse and you were describing about liberation and Laghu Bhagavatamrita,
Liberate? Oh, King Kulashekar.
No, I'm in the earlier chapter 29. 29. In the beginning of our class today.
Okay.
That you were mentioning about liberation, right? So I was.
Janana Marana Moksha, yeah.
I was just having this thought that, how Narada Muni was, in fact, inspiring Kamsa to commit some crimes, although at certain point of time he was not fully inclined.
Yeah.
Right? So I had this thought in my mind that is Narada Muni understanding the nature of Kamsa, he was just pushing him towards liberation, or?
Oh, he definitely understood the nature of Kamsa. It wasn't that. I mean, it wasn't. That was part of what he was doing, but he was pushing things along. He's pushing the pastime along. I mean, it happens. Yeah, that he's pushing. The advent of Krishna. Is coming along. So he's He's explaining that actually that eighth son is already there. You know, was that one? I think he told Kamsa that he's already existing. You know, and so that happens repeatedly in other pastimes. I can't think of, but in the Bhagavatam he does that. You know, a lot because he's he's eager to see the you know Krishna perform his activities and things move along. And sometimes you think, well, how could he do that? You know, he's endangering all those the people in Vrindavan. You know, and Kamsa did. He sent all these dangerous, the forest fires. You know, that's part of the demons and everything, and it's such dangers. But he knew very well that Krishna would protect, and he was taking a role of kind of a stage manager. You know, managing the whole play, Krishna's display of pastimes. So there's nothing nefarious about it. He's a very intimate associate of the Lord. And it just goes to set, you know, the certain tempo of the pastimes that are happening. So he understood, and it was good for Kamsa. Ultimately, he's getting his liberation. You know, he's moving on, getting intimate association with Krishna. Maybe in not the most desired way, getting pummeled, and you know, eventually. But it's all for the good. All right, we need to adjourn and get ready for kirtan. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol. Mm-hmm.